The carriage lurched to a stop on the North Road 2 hours after the sky had turned the color of pewter, and Honora Whitlock understood, with the calm particular to women who have long since stopped expecting kindness from weather or men, that she was not going to reach Ashcombe by nightfall. The coachman had shouted something into the wind. She had caught only the shape of it, the vowels torn away, before they reached her window. Snow had come down first, as a courtesy, a scatter, a whisper, and then as an argument, and then in the last quarter hour as a verdict. The horses were done. The road, if there was still a road beneath them, had disappeared under a bright, level, unforgiving white. She sat very still inside the compartment, with her gloved hands folded in her lap, and she counted, as she had counted since she was 15, all the reasons she was not permitted to be afraid. There was the trunk strap behind, containing everything she owned. There was her aunt's letter in her reticule, folded 4 times, and softening at the creases. There was the fact that she was, at this moment, still expected somewhere. And there was the plain, unromantic knowledge that no one on the other end of the road would send anyone back for her before morning, because the person she was going to marry had not, so far as she could tell, ever quite believed she was coming. Rupert Ellsworth. His name, on the page, looked like a man who had signed it in a hurry. She had never met him. She had met his mother once at a wedding in York 2 summers ago, and the woman had looked her up and down in the receiving line with the slow, uncomplicated appraisal of a butcher weighing meat, and had said, aloud to another lady across her shoulder, "Well, at least the linens will be well kept." Honora had smiled without moving her eyes. She had been 28 then. She was 30 now. The Whitlock money had gone the way of her father's health, which was to say, slowly, and then all at once. And a match had been arranged with the poor, respectable, entirely unsuitable second son of a good family that needed her small remaining dowry as much as it needed the settling of its most feckless boy. At least the linens will be well kept. The door of the carriage was wrenched open, and a face full of snow shouted into the compartment that they must go on foot, that there was a hall not half a mile off the road, that the horses would be led there, or they would die where they stood. Honora nodded, once. She stepped down. She sank to her calves in the snow and did not gasp, because gasping wasted breath and gave the cold a place to enter, and she had learned as a child that a large woman moving in wet skirts had to conserve every ounce of what she had. Her boots were sensible, her cloak was heavy wool that had been her mother's. She thanked, silently and with an old private courtesy, the woman who had thought to line it with fur before she died. The coachman took her arm. She let him. They walked. The world was a white bell being struck by wind, and every step required an act of will that she did not permit herself to consider as effort. She thought instead of the letter in her reticule, and of the phrase her aunt had underlined twice, "He will make no demands upon you beyond civility." She thought this was the sort of promise women wrote to other women when they had run out of better ones to offer. The hall, when it emerged from the white, was not a hall. It was, she saw as they came up the drive, a great house, a real one, with the long, low frontage, and the deep-set windows of something built to outlast weather and dynasties both. 2 lamps burned in the entrance hall behind glass that had not been cleaned this winter. A groom appeared from a side door and took the horses without a word, as though people staggered out of the snow onto his forecourt every evening of his life. Honora let go of the coachman's arm. She stood a moment on the step and put her hand flat against the door before she knocked, because she had learned in her aunt's house that a person in wet clothes must gather herself before she went inside, or the room would be told everything about her before she opened her mouth. She lifted the ring. She let it fall. The door was opened by a housekeeper of perhaps 60, who looked at her, at the coachman behind her, at the snow filling the drive in a steady white fury, and said only, "Come in, come in, come in, before the whole county freezes on my step." Her voice had the north in it, and warmth, and the flatness of a woman who had run large houses through. Worse than this, she took Honora's cloak with hands that did not fuss. She said, "You'll be for Ashcombe." "I was for Ashcombe," Honora said. "I do not think I am for anywhere tonight." "No," said the housekeeper, with something almost like humor. "No, madam, you are not. You are for a fire, and a hot brick and a plate, of whatever cook still has warm, and I will not hear another word said about it until you sit down." She turned, she said over her shoulder, "His Grace is in the library. I shall send word." Honora, in the act of unpinning her sodden hat, went still for perhaps the space of one breath. His Grace. She had, when she stepped into the snow, been a woman engaged to marry the second son of a modest Yorkshire family. She had ended, apparently, in the entrance hall of a duke. There was a small, precise, deadpan portion of her mind that thought, well, of all the places one might have died of exposure this evening, this at least has better draperies. She was shown into a sitting room on the ground floor, where a fire had been laid but not built up, and where the housekeeper, Mrs. Farrow, she had said, knelt at the hearth with the ease of a woman who was not too proud to build her own fires when the weather was frank about itself. Honora sat where she was told, in a low chair covered in worn green silk, and the housekeeper set the poker down and stood, and said, "You are shivering, madam, that will pass. You will not thank me for hurrying it." "I will not thank you for anything," Honora said. "You have done more than a stranger is owed." Mrs. Farrow looked at her for a moment with an expression Honora could not read. Then she said, "A stranger with wet skirts and a civil tongue is not so common as you seem to think," and she went out. Honora sat in the chair. The room was very quiet. She could hear the wind against the shutters, and somewhere further in the house, the small businesslike sounds of a household that had been surprised but not undone. She thought about her trunk, which was still strapped to the carriage in the yard. She thought about her aunt, who would not know until Tuesday that she had not arrived. She thought about Rupert Ellsworth, whom she was still contracted to marry a week from Saturday, and who, she now recalled, had a cousin. An older cousin, several years older, the head of the family, who had been mentioned twice in her aunt's letters and dismissed each time in the same breath. A man in mourning, her aunt had written. A widower these 3 years. He does not go about. He would not concern us. He would not concern us. She was still turning that phrase over when the door opened, and the man who came into the room was tall and dark-haired and wearing a plain black coat, and he stopped just inside the threshold and looked at her without moving for what she counted as 3 full seconds before he inclined his head. "Madam," he said, "you are welcome here. I understand you had intended Ashcombe." His voice was low and even, and it did not sound like the voice of a man who was pleased. It did not sound like the voice of a man who was displeased, either. It sounded like the voice of a man who had trained himself, at some cost, to sound neither. Honora rose. She had been taught by her mother that a woman met a stranger in her own house standing, and though this was not her house, she thought her mother would have understood. "Your Grace," she said, "I did not intend to intrude upon you." "The storm." "The storm intended it," he said. "You are not to apologize for weather." He did not smile. But something at the corner of his mouth eased as though he had heard himself and did not entirely approve. "Please, sit. Mrs. Farrow will bring you something. Your coachman is being fed in the kitchen. Your horses are stabled. Your trunk is inside. There is nothing you are required to think about tonight, except being warm." She sat, because he had asked her to, and because her legs had begun to be honest with her about the last mile. She said, "You are very good." "I am not," he said so evenly that she nearly laughed. I am the nearest habitable roof between here and the pass. Any other man of any rank would have done the same. I would prefer we did not begin with a debt you do not owe." He crossed to the fire. He stood with his back half to her, and she used the moment because she had always used such moments. The small, unguarded seconds before a man remembered he was being watched, to look at him properly. He was perhaps 38. His hair had not yet begun to gray. He was not handsome in the way portraits were painted. His features were too plain, too still, too much the face of a man who had learned to give the world nothing to work with. But he noticed things. She saw him notice things. He had noticed, when he entered the position of her boots by the fire. She had set them there herself, and been embarrassed by them, and he had not looked at them again. He had noticed the small tremor in her hands, and had asked her to sit before she had to explain it. He had noticed, she suspected, that she was a large woman in a wet gown, tired to the point of collapse, and he had given her nothing to defend against. He was, she thought carefully, the first man in a great while who had not made her aware, in the first moment of meeting, of the size of the room she was taking up. "I am Honora Whitlock," she said. "I was traveling to Ashcombe to marry your cousin Rupert." He turned. He looked at her again, with the same still directness, and this time she saw something move behind his eyes, very quickly, very briefly, as though a small light had been struck and shielded. Then he said, "I see." "You did not know," she said. "I knew he was to marry," said the Duke. "I did not know when. I did not know whom. Rupert is not at present in the habit of consulting me on his correspondence." His voice remained perfectly even. "You will be very welcome here, until the road opens. I will send word to Ashcombe in the morning, if the weather permits any word to go anywhere at all." "Thank you," she said. He inclined his head. He said, "You will be shown to a room. There is no one else in the house tonight of any consequence. My sons are with their aunt at Kingston until 12th night, and the household is small. You will not be disturbed. Good evening, Mrs. Whitlock." He was at the door before she said, without meaning to, "Miss." He paused. He did not turn back at once. When he did, his face was as still as it had been, but she thought, she was not sure, but she thought that he had heard her the way one hears a bell struck in another room. "Miss Whitlock," he said. "Good evening." He went out. "And here is the thing, child." She sat by the fire in a stranger's silk chair with the snow falling outside the window in a great white silence, and she did not know yet that she had walked on numb feet and half frozen out of one story and into another. She did not know it because he had given her no cause to know it. She only knew that a man of extraordinary rank had spoken to her as though she were a person, and had refused her thanks, and had noticed her boots, without looking at them twice, and she thought, in the quiet, dry part of her mind that had kept her alive, through her father's dying and her aunt's charity both, that whoever the late Duchess had been, she had been loved by a man who knew how to hold a room still. Then Mrs. Farrow came in with a tray, and the world became broth, and bread, and the small, blessed, unromantic business of surviving a night. She slept in a room hung with pale blue that had been aired in a hurry. She smelled the fresh sheet under the bed warmer, and the faint dust in the curtain that had not been drawn all winter, and she woke before dawn to the sound of the wind gone. She lay a moment in the strange bed and listened. The house was still. The storm had blown itself out somewhere in the small hours. She rose. She went to the window. Beyond the glass the world was white to the horizon, and the drive was buried, and no carriage would come, and none would go for 2 days, at least. She thought, with the calm of a woman who had learned to receive news, that she was not going to Ashcombe today, and possibly not tomorrow. She thought with less calm than she would have liked, that this was likely to become a matter of talk. She dressed with the care of a woman who had been trained to hide the fact that dressing herself with care mattered to her. She wore her second-best gown, which was gray wool and plain, because she had learned long ago that a large woman in a great house did herself no favors by attempting to be striking. She pinned her hair with the 2 good combs her mother had left her. She went down. The Duke was at breakfast. He rose when she came in, which surprised her. She had thought, in a house of this size, that he would take his meal alone, and that she would be given hers apart. He said, "Miss Whitlock, good morning. The road is closed. I have sent a man on foot with word to Ashcombe. He will arrive by evening, if the drifts allow. In the meantime you are, I hope, comfortable." "I am extremely comfortable," she said. "You are very patient with an accident." "You are not an accident," he said mildly. "You are a guest. Please sit." She sat. There was tea, and there was toast. And there was a small pot of preserves that she recognized, after a moment, as being the sort her mother had used to make in a good year. She spread a very small quantity on a very small piece of toast, because she had learned in her aunt's house to eat as though she were not hungry in any room where she was being watched. And he saw it. She was certain, without looking up, that he saw it. He said nothing. He passed her the butter without being asked, and he said, "Eat something proper, Miss Whitlock. You walked half a mile in a blizzard last night. You will insult my cook otherwise, and she has been insulted enough by circumstance this winter, without my house adding to it." She looked up. She found him watching her quite plainly, with an expression that was not indulgence, and was not pity, and was not quite anything she had a name for. She said, "I have offended you." "You have not," he said. "You have offended a plate of food that was cooked for you. Specifically, I am indifferent." His eyes did not leave her face. "Eat, Miss Whitlock." She ate. They spoke, over the meal, of small, unimportant things, the storm, the road, the state of the North, and she found, to her private astonishment, that he listened when she answered. Not as a courtesy, as a habit. He asked her a question about the toll roads out of York, and, when she gave him her actual opinion of them, he considered it before he replied. She had not, in 10 years of being handed around at country tables, had a man of any rank consider what she said before he replied. She felt uneasily. A small warmth began somewhere under her ribs that had nothing at all to do with the fire. Then he set down his cup and said, in the same even voice, "I must ask you something, Miss Whitlock, that you are free to refuse. To answer, please. Are you marrying my cousin because you wish to marry my cousin?" he said, "or because someone has determined you must marry someone, and he is the someone available?" She sat very still. She had been asked many things in her life. She had never been asked that. She said, after a moment, "You do not know your cousin well, your grace." "I know him precisely well enough," he said. "That is why I ask." She looked at the preserves. She looked at the small silver spoon beside them. She thought about lying briefly, because lying was the trained response of a poor woman at a rich table, and she was aware that the truth, said in this room, could not be unsaid. Then she looked up, because she had also been trained by her mother, that a woman who could not tell the truth to a stranger who asked plainly, had already lost something she would want back later. "I've never met him," she said. "The match was made by my aunt and his mother. My father died in debt. My aunt has been generous, and her generosity has a horizon. Your cousin's family needs the small settlement that comes with me. I need a household. I understand he does not object to my person. I understand he is not at present in a position to object to anything that improves his circumstances." She heard herself. She heard the dry, even, faintly ironic register. She had chosen, because it was the only register in which the sentence could be delivered without collapsing. She said, "That is the truth of it, Your Grace. I am sorry if it is not the truth you were hoping for." He did not answer at once. Why? He looked at her. Not at her hands. Not at her plate. Not at the polite surfaces of her, but at her face. And she felt for the first time in a long time the peculiar exposed sensation of being read by someone who knew how to read. He said at length, "It is the truth I expected. I am not sorry to hear you speak it." Then he said, "My cousin is not a bad man. I would not have you think I am about to abuse him at his own breakfast table. But he is a young man who has been indulged, past the point of usefulness, and he will not be a kind husband. He will not be a cruel one, either. He will be an absent one. He will spend your settlement. He will forget your name in company more than once. He will not know what to do with a wife who is cleverer than he is, and my cousin's wife would be cleverer than he is if she were a spaniel." A pause. The corner of his mouth almost moved. "You will forgive me. It has been a long winter, and I have been thinking about my family more than is good for me." She surprised herself by laughing. It was a small laugh, and it escaped her, and she pressed her napkin briefly to her mouth to catch it before she said, "Your Grace, that was uncharitable." "It was," he agreed. "It was also true. I try, as a rule, to have one or the other. I do not always manage both." She looked at him, and he looked back at her, and something in the room, some very small quiet thing, altered. He said then, without any change in his voice at all, "Miss Whitlaw, you are not going to marry my cousin." She set down her cup. "I beg your pardon. I have said it badly." He drew breath. He set his own cup down with care. "Forgive me. I did not intend to say it at all this morning. But I have thought about it since I saw you come in from the snow last night, and I find I cannot let you leave this house on Wednesday and walk into that marriage without saying it, and I would rather say it plainly than allow us to spend 3 days pretending I have not thought it." He looked at her steadily. "There is a settlement I could make. There is a house near Harrowmere that would be yours outright. There is a small living I could arrange with a clergyman I trust, and you could keep it or refuse it, or turn it over to charity, as you please. You need not marry Rupert. You need not marry anyone. You will not be poor. You will not be at your aunt's mercy. You will be under no obligation whatever to me beyond, if you would grant it, the occasional civility of a letter." She stared at him. She stared at him for what felt to her, in that moment, like a very long time. Long enough that she was aware of the servant in the corridor, beyond the door pausing, and moving on, and the clock on the mantel finding the next quarter. She said, "Your Grace." "Why?" He did not answer at once. Then he said, and it was the first time she had heard his voice change, "Because a woman walked out of a blizzard onto my step last night, wearing her mother's cloak, and thanked the housekeeper before she thanked me. And I have been in this house for 3 years, without being able to hear it, and I do not intend to send her to Rupert." The fire cracked. She did not move. He said more quietly, "That is not an offer of marriage, Miss Whitlock. Do not mistake me. I know precisely what I am, and what I am not, and what I have to give a woman at this hour of my life. I am offering you a way out. That is all. Whatever comes after is a matter for a spring that has not arrived." She sat, and she thought about her mother, who had died believing her daughter would marry well. She thought about her father, who had died believing his daughter would be provided for. She thought about her aunt, who had believed she was doing her a kindness. She thought about Rupert Ellsworth, who had not written her a single letter in 6 months, and about his mother, who had once, in a receiving line in York, taken her measure and said, At least the linens will be well kept. At least the linens will be well kept. She looked at the Duke, who had, in a quiet room in the first hour of the morning, after a blizzard, offered her a house, and a living, and no obligation whatever, and she said, "You do not know me, your grace?" "No," he said, "I do not. That is why I am not asking you to marry me. I am asking you to be free enough to be known." She did not answer at once, then she said, "Before I answer anything, your grace, you will tell me the truth, all of it. I do not bargain with half a story." He inclined his head. He said, "Ask your wife," she said. "Mrs. Farrow spoke of your sons, you spoke of your family. I will not step into any arrangement, however generous, that is a shadow of another woman. I will not be a solution to a grief. If that is what this is, I would rather Rupert." There was a silence, then the Duke said, "Her name was Cecily. She died 3 years ago in the autumn. My sons are 8 and 6. She was beloved of this house, and she is not to be erased from it, and I do not intend to try. If you are asking whether I am offering you her place, I am not. There is no such place available. If you are asking whether I am lonely, I am. Those are separate things, and I will not pretend otherwise. I have not been able to pretend otherwise since you took your cloak off in my hall last night. That is the truth, all of it. It is not flattering. I have no more." She looked at him. She said quietly, "What is your name, your grace?" He blinked. It was the smallest possible break in his composure. He said, "Alistair." She said, "Alistair. Thank you. I will answer you when the road opens." He said, "That is more than I asked for." She rose. She said, "You have not eaten your toast." "No," he said. She did not look back until she reached the door, and when she did he was still sitting in his chair, with his hand flat on the tablecloth beside his untouched plate, and he was watching her go, with the expression of a man who had not in 3 years allowed himself to watch anyone at all. Mrs. Farrow found her in the long gallery an hour later, walking the length of it because she could not sit, and the housekeeper said nothing for some time. Then she said, "You are troubled." "I am considering," said Honora. "That is not the same." "No," said Honora. "It is not." She paused before a portrait of a woman in a pale green gown, painted perhaps 7 years ago, with hair the color of dark honey, and a mouth that suggested she had been laughing at the painter 30 seconds before the sitting began. "This is the Duchess, that is her grace, yes." Honora looked at the portrait for some time. She thought that she had never in her life resembled anyone in a painting, and that she did not resemble this woman in any particular whatever, and that this was, if she was going to consider anything at all, a comfort rather than the reverse. She said, "She was loved." "Extremely," said Mrs. Farrow. "He does not speak of her. He speaks of her to the boys. He does not speak of her to himself. That has been the difficulty." Mrs. Farrow folded her hands. She had, Honora noticed, hands worn to a fine plainness by 40 years of work. "Miss Whitlock, I am overstepping. I will overstep once, and then not again. He has not eaten a breakfast in company in this house since the funeral. He took his tea in the library, and his supper on a tray, and he came down to the table this morning, because a strange woman was in the breakfast room, and he thought it would be uncivil not to. That is what happened this morning. You may make what you like of it." "Honora," said Mrs. Farrow. "Yes, his eldest son, what is he like?" Mrs. Farrow considered. Then she said, "He is called Thomas. He is 8. He has not spoken above a whisper since his mother died, and he has not sung a note since, though he was a beautiful singer before. He believes this is not repeated, Miss Whitlock, and I trust you with it." He believes that his singing tired his mother in her illness and hastened her death. He was told, so in words, by a person who ought not to have been in a sick room with a child. He has never repeated what was said, he has only stopped. His father does not know what to do. No one does. None stayed. Honora was quiet. Then she said, "Thank you, Mrs. Farrow. That was not overstepping, that was a kindness." "It was both," said Mrs. Farrow, and went away. Honora stood before the portrait of Cecily Harrowmere for a long time. She thought about a boy who believed his own voice was a poison. She thought about a man who had not eaten breakfast in his own house for 3 years. She thought about a great cold hall that counted its candles, because there had been no reason to burn them. She thought about herself, standing in her mother's cloak, in the snow at the top of the drive last night, and about the fact that she had not, in the moment of stepping down from the carriage, expected to survive the walk, and had made peace with it. She thought that a woman who had made peace, however briefly, with dying in a drift, did not owe the rest of her life to a man she had never met, whose mother had once discussed the quality of her linens across her shoulder in a receiving line. She went to find Alistair Harrowmere. He was in the library. The door was open. He looked up when she came in as though he had been expecting her, and had also been quite certain she would not come. She said, "I have not answered you. I am not answering you yet. But I would like, if I may, to meet your son," he said, after a moment. "Thomas is at Kingston. When he comes home on Friday, if the road opens." "Then I will stay until Friday," she said. "If your household will bear it, and on Friday I will meet him, and then I will answer you." He rose. He crossed to her, not quickly, not slowly, with the ordinary quiet economy she had already begun to recognize as the way he moved, and he stopped a step short of her and said, "Miss Whitlock, you do not owe him a meeting." "You do not owe me one, I know," she said. "That is why I am offering it." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw quite plainly what she thought his wife had probably seen every day of her marriage, that his face, when he allowed it, was capable of extraordinary gentleness. He said, "Thank you." She said, "Your Grace." "Alistair. One thing more. Yes. I will not have him told, before he arrives, that I am here for any reason but the storm. He is not to be given a hope. He is not to be given a fear. If I meet him as a woman stranded in his father's house because the road was closed. That is all. Whatever comes after, comes after." "Agreed." "And your cousin? I will write to Rupert today. I will not tell him you refused him. I will tell him I am reconsidering the settlement and the delay is mine. He will complain to his mother. His mother will complain to your aunt. Your aunt will write to you here. You will answer as you please. If in the end you go to Ashcombe, no one will have been told anything that cannot be walked back. You will be protected in either direction. That is the arrangement I am proposing." "That is a great deal of thought for an hour's work, Your Grace." "It is not an hour's work," he said. "It is 3 years of practice at protecting people who did not ask me to. I am glad for once to put it to a use that improves a life instead of failing to save one." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, quite quietly, "You did not fail her." He did not answer. She said, "You did not." He looked away. He said, "You do not know that, Miss Whitlock." "No," she said, "I do not. But you do not know it either, and it seems to me that a man who does not know a thing might as well permit himself the better of the two possibilities. My father used to say that, your father sounds a wiser man than mine. He was a bankrupt," she said, "but he was kind. I will settle for kind." He looked at her then in a way she felt, in the small bones of her wrists, and he said, So will I. Thomas Harrowmere arrived on Friday afternoon in a carriage sent from Kingston, with 2 grooms and his younger brother William, and Honora watched from the window of the small sitting room as the elder boy stepped down onto the swept gravel, and looked up at the house, with the expression of a child returning to a place he did not quite trust to still be there. He was small for 8, he was very fair. He had, she thought, his mother's mouth. He did not run to his father, who was standing at the top of the steps. He walked. He put his hand into his father's hand, as though completing a formality, and his father closed his fingers around it as though he had been waiting 3 days to do so, and they went into the house together, without a word said between them. William, who was 6, ran. William talked. William talked to the grooms, to the dog that came out of the stable, to Mrs. Farrow, to his father, to the heir. Honora watched him and thought, that one is loved by everyone and knows it. And she watched Thomas walking behind and thought, and that one believes he is loved by no one, and neither is true. She was introduced in the hall as Miss Whitlock, a guest of the house, stranded by the storm, who would be with them until the road to Ashcombe opened properly. She curtsied to William, who bowed with enormous solemnity, and then ruined it with a grin. She curtsied to Thomas, who inclined his head like a very small ambassador, and did not smile and did not speak. She said, Master Thomas, I have been told you are the reader of this house. I have been reading a book from your father's library, that I cannot make head or tail of. I do not suppose you might be persuaded to look at it after supper. He looked at her. He looked at her for a long moment, with the appraising stillness of a child who had learned early that adults asked questions with hooks in them, and he waited to see the hook. There was no hook. He nodded. Hook. He did not speak. Thank you, she said, and let him go. Alistair, later in the corridor outside the nursery, said quietly, You did that well. I did nothing, she said. I asked a boy for a favor, and did not require an answer. That is not skill. That is only having been the child at the table who was spoken over. He looked at her. He said, Miss Whitlock. Yes. You will forgive me. I do not know how to say this without saying it badly. Whoever spoke over you at that table was a fool. She said, Your Grace, I am aware. He almost smiled. He said, Good. And she thought, going down the stairs alone a moment later, with her hand on the polished rail, that she had been in this house 4 days, and she had been fed, and warmed, and asked her opinion, and given a room in a corridor where no other person slept, and no one, in 4 days, had commented on the size of her, or the plainness of her gown, or the size of her plate, and she did not know what to do with the strange, exposed, tender sensation of being simply present in a room without having to defend her presence in it. She sat with Thomas after supper in the library, and she put her book on the table between them, and she said, It is not a book I understand. I do not read Latin well. My father tried to teach me, and I was a poor pupil. She did not look at Thomas. She looked at the book. But he told me once that if you cannot read a line of Latin, you should read it aloud anyway, and let the shape of the words do half the work. I have never had the courage to try, because I am afraid of sounding foolish. Would you sit by me while I try? You need not read anything yourself. You need only be present. He looked at her. Then he sat down. She read a line. She read it badly. She was aware, painfully, of how badly she read it. She did not correct herself. She read the next line. She read 3 lines, in this way, and then she put her finger under a word and said, This one, I do not know at all. And Thomas looked at the word, and looked at her, and then, without speaking, wrote the meaning on the margin in a small, careful, 8-year-old's hand. She said, Thank you. He nodded. She read another line. He wrote another word. And so they sat for perhaps 20 minutes, and no sound passed between them except the sound of her voice, mispronouncing Latin and the small deliberate scratch of his pencil on the paper. And once, near the end, when she mispronounced a word so badly that even a child of 8 could not permit it to stand, he made a very small sound that might, to on another day, in another life, have been a laugh. She did not look at him when he made it. She turned the page. She read on. When she closed the book, he stood and bowed to her. A solemn, formal, entirely 8-year-old bow, and went out. She heard him go up the stairs. She heard him pause on the landing. She did not turn her head. With Maud, she heard him say, very quietly from the landing, "Good night, Miss Whitlock." It was a whisper. It was the first whisper of a voice she had not previously heard use itself at all. She said without turning, without raising her voice, "Good night, Master Thomas." She did not move for some time after he had gone. When she looked up, Alister was standing in the doorway. She did not know how long he had been there. He did not come in. He said only, "You are staying." She said, "Yes." "On what terms?" "On the terms we will negotiate tomorrow, your grace, when we have both slept. Tonight I do not have the strength for it. But I will not be marrying your cousin." He inclined his head. He said, "Thank you." She said, "Do not thank me for anything before we have agreed the terms." "I am not thanking you for staying," he said. "I am thanking you for the whisper on the landing." She looked at him. She said, "That was not my doing." "No," he said, "it was his." "But it was your book he wrote in, I noticed." He noticed, she thought. He noticed. He had noticed the book. He had noticed the pencil. He had noticed that she had not turned her head when the whisper came, because turning would have made a matter of it, and, mattering, would have ended it. He noticed the shape of every small thing that occurred in this house, and no one, she suspected, had noticed him noticing in a very long time. She said, "Good night, Alister." He said, "Good night, Honora." It was the first time either had used the other's name plainly. Neither remarked on it. She went to bed. The road opened on the Sunday. On the Monday her aunt's letter arrived, in a fury, wanting to know where she was, and why she was, and what she was thinking. On the Tuesday, Rupert Ellsworth arrived in person, in an inferior carriage, with an inferior temper, and stood in the drawing-room in his gloves, and demanded to know by what right his cousin was harboring his intended. She had been prepared for him. Alister had been prepared for him. They had agreed, over 3 quiet mornings, the terms of the thing that Rupert would be paid off, that the small settlement Honora's aunt had produced would be returned in full, with an additional sum to spare Rupert's dignity, so that no one might say she had left him in worse case than she had found him. That Rupert would sign, in the presence of Alister's solicitor, a release from the contract. That he would go home and complain to his mother and be within a season engaged to someone else, and that the whole matter, with a little discretion on all sides, would be smoothed into the ordinary shape of a match that had not upon further consideration taken. Rupert was not at first prepared to be smoothed. He said, with his gloves still in his hand and his face pink from the cold in the affront, "So I am to be jilted, cousin, by the woman my mother chose, in your house, while I am not consulted." Alister said, evenly, "You are being consulted now." "I am being told." "You are being told the settlement." "Yes." "You are being asked whether you accept it." "There is a difference. I recommend the difference to you, Rupert. It is the difference between leaving this room with your reputation intact and leaving it without," Rupert said, "and you, Miss Whitlock, you have nothing to say for yourself." Honora, who had been standing by the window, turned. She said, "I have a great deal to say, Mr. Ellsworth. Most of it would not improve your afternoon. I will confine myself to this. I do not know you. You do not know me. You have not written to me in 6 months. Your mother has spoken of me in receiving lines in a manner I will not repeat. In this room I do not believe our marriage would have been happy for either of us. And I know it would not have been happy for me. Your cousin has offered a settlement that spares your position entirely. I would recommend you accept it. If you do not, I shall refuse the marriage without a settlement, and you shall be jilted publicly rather than privately. Those are the choices before you. Take whichever you can defend at your club. Rupert opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at Alistair, who was standing quite still by the fire with his hands behind his back. He said, "Cousin, is this your doing?" "No," said Alistair. "It is her doing. I have merely provided the room. You wish to marry her yourself. That is not before us today. That is not an answer." "No," said Alistair. "It is not. It is not required to be." Rupert stared at him. He stared at Honora. Then he said, with a small, bitter, entirely honest laugh, "You are welcome to her, cousin. I did not want a woman of her size in any case. I only wanted her money." The room went very still. "I did not want a woman of her size. In any case," the words hung. Honora did not move. She had in her life been struck by that sentence in many rooms, in many houses, in the mouths of many men and several women. And she had trained herself, at 20, at 25, at 29, to receive it without flinching, because flinching gave the striker the pleasure of the strike. She stood by the window in her gray wool gown, and she let the sentence land, and she did not lift her chin, because lifting her chin would have been a defense, and she had learned that defense was another form of admitting the blow. Alistair moved. He did not raise his voice. He did not step forward. He said in a register so quiet that Rupert, who had begun to smile at his own wit, lost the smile before it finished. "Rupert, you will apologize to Miss Whitlock, or you will leave this house on foot. Cousin, you will apologize now." Rupert looked at him. Then Rupert, who is not a stupid man, only a small one, said, "Miss Whitlock, I beg your pardon." She inclined her head. She did not speak. Alistair said, "Mrs. Farrow will show you to my solicitor, who is waiting in the small study. You will sign what he places before you. You will accept the settlement. You will go home. You will not, at any table, anywhere, speak of Miss Whitlock's person again. If I hear that you have, I will not require an apology a second time. Do we understand each other, cousin?" Rupert said, "We do." He went out. The door closed. Honora stood by the window. She did not turn. She had been trained in the receiving line at York and at 100 tables since, that a woman who had just been struck in company must not immediately show her face, because her face would give away too much, and it would be discussed for a fortnight. She heard Alistair cross the room. He did not touch her. He stood beside her at the window, half a pace off, and he looked out at the same white lawn she was looking out at, and he said, quietly, "I am sorry, Honora. I am sorry that was said in a room I brought you into." She said, "You did not say it." "No. Then you have nothing to be sorry for." "I have a great deal to be sorry for." He said, "I have known Rupert since he was a boy. I know exactly the kind of thing he says. I should have had that conversation with him before you were in the room. I did not, because I wanted him to have to say it to your face, so that you would see him plainly, and I would not have to tell you. What he was, that was cowardice on my part. I used you to make a point. About my own cousin." She turned. She looked at him. She said, "Alistair, that is a very long apology for a small thing." "It is not a small thing." "No," she said after a moment. "It is not, but it is not a thing I have not survived before. And I would rather, on the whole, be here when it was said than in a drawing-room in Ashcombe, married to him, 3 years from now, when he said it in front of my own children. She drew a breath. You did me a service. Do not spoil it by regretting the shape of the service. He looked at her. He said, You are a formidable woman, Honora Whitlock. I am a tired one, she said. I would like to sit down. He handed her to a chair. She sat. She sat with her hands in her lap, and she was aware very suddenly that they were shaking, and that they had not shaken while Rupert was in the room, and that they were shaking now because it was safe to shake. She looked at them with a certain private amusement. She said, There is a lesson in that. A woman can only tremble in front of a person she trusts. Rupert was not owed my hands. Alistair, who was sitting in the chair opposite her, said, No. He was not. She said, Alistair. Yes. When you offered me a settlement and a house, and no obligation, whatever, you said, Whatever comes after is a matter for a spring that has not arrived. I did. I would like the spring to arrive on its own time, she said. I would like for the winter to stay in this house, as I have stayed these past weeks. As a guest, as Thomas's Latin partner, as a woman who is teaching herself, at 30, that she can eat a piece of toast in front of a man without apologizing for the size of the toast. I would like in the spring, if we still wish it, to speak of what comes after. Not before. I do not want to be a bargain struck during a storm. I want to be a choice made in fair weather. Do you understand? He said, I understand. You are not offended. I am relieved. Are you? I am relieved, he said. Because a woman who tells me that in a chair in my own drawing room is a woman who intends in the spring to answer me honestly. And I have spent 3 years being answered by servants and cousins and solicitors, and I have forgotten what an honest answer sounds like. I would rather wait for one than be told a false one now. She looked at him. She said, Very well. He said, Very well. And so it was that Honora Whitlock, who had come out of a blizzard on a night in December expecting to marry a man she had never met, spent the winter at Harrowmere as a guest of the Duke of Harrowmere and his household, and read Latin with a boy who did not speak above a whisper, and taught the younger boy to play a card game her father had invented when she was 6, and mended. In the long evenings, a set of altar cloths from the chapel that had gone unattended for 3 years because no one in the house had been able to bear the chapel since the funeral. She did not attempt to reach the pianoforte. She did not attempt to sit in the Duchess's chair in the small dining room. She did not, in short, take a single inch of ground she had not been offered. And Alistair Harrowmere, who watched her do all of this from the corners of rooms and from the far end of tables and from the doorway of the library at 9 in the evening, said nothing about any of it, and thought more than once that the house had begun to make a different sound than it had made in 3 years, and that the difference was the sound of a woman being present in it, who was not trying to prove she deserved to be there. She did not know, and he did not tell her, that in January he wrote to his solicitor, and had the settlement drawn up in a form that would be hers whether she stayed or went. He did not tell her, because he did not want it to be a bribe. He wanted it to be a fact. Thomas began to speak in February. He spoke first to the dog, then to William, in the corridor, when he thought no one else was there, then to Mrs. Farrow over a matter of a torn stocking. Then, on a Sunday morning, in the 2nd week of February, to Honora, in the library, when she had put down her book to reach for her tea, and he said, without looking up from his own book, You are pronouncing the word wrong. The stress is on the second syllable. She said, without looking at him, Thank you, Master Thomas. I have been pronouncing it wrong for a fortnight. It is a kindness of you to correct me. He said, You have been pronouncing it wrong for 4 weeks. She said, That is worse. Thank you. There was a small silence. Then he said, Miss Whitlock, Yes. My mother used to sing a hymn on Sunday mornings. I do not remember all of it. I remember the tune. I would like to hear it sung again. I cannot sing it. I do not know if you sing. She set down her cup. She said, I sing badly. I sing in tune. But I sing badly, would badly do. He said badly would do. She said, which hymn? He hummed a few notes. She recognized it. It was the sort of hymn every country parish in England knew, and she had sung it as a child in her father's pew, and she thought, with the sudden ache of a woman who had been alone longer than she had known, that she had not sung it since her father died. She sang it badly, as promised. She sang it in a small, clear voice that had gone a little rusty from disuse. And she sang the second verse, and the third, and when she came to the end, she did not look at Thomas, because she had learned that looking at him ended things. He said very quietly, Thank you. She said thank you. Alister, who had been standing in the corridor outside the library door for the length of the hymn, did not come in. She learned this later, from Mrs. Farrow, who had passed him there and had made no comment either at the time or afterwards. She learned that he had stood in the corridor with his hand flat against the wall, as though the wall required steadying, and that he had gone into his study after and closed the door, and had not come out for 2 hours. But men are slow, child, and dukes are slower than most, and grief makes fools of the cleverest of us. He did not speak to her of it. Not then. He waited. He waited because he had said, in December, that spring would decide. And he was a man who kept his word even to himself. Spring came in on the last week of March. The road out of Harrowmere was clear. The lawns were beginning, in patches, to remember. They were green. The chapel bell rang for the first Sunday service that anyone in the household had attended in 3 years, and Alister sat in his pew with his 2 sons on either side of him, and Honora sat behind them because she was still a guest of the house and not a member of the family, and Thomas sang the hymn. He sang it quietly. He sang it in the small, careful voice of a boy who was not yet certain. His voice was permitted, but he sang it. He sang all 3 verses. His father did not turn to look at him. His father sat very still in the pew, and his shoulders, Honora noticed from where she sat, were shaking, very slightly, in the way of a man who was refusing to weep in a public place, and was mostly succeeding. Afterwards in the churchyard, Alister came to her, and he said, Honora, yes, it is spring. It is. I said, I would ask you. In the spring. You did. He did not go down on one knee. He was not that sort of man, and she would not have wanted it of him. He stood in front of her on the wet grass of a country churchyard in the last week of March, with his sons a little way off, looking at a stone lion by the gate. And he said, I am not asking you because Thomas has begun to speak, and I am not asking you because you sang his mother's hymn. And I am not asking you because you refused Rupert and stayed the winter and mended the altar cloths in the chapel. We could not enter. I am asking you because I have loved you since December, and I did not know it in December, and I have known it plainly since the 3rd week of January, and I have kept my word, and waited for the spring because you asked me to. And now the spring is here. And I am asking. She looked at him. She said, Alister. Yes, do not say it. If it is only gratitude. I have thought about this. I have thought about it for 3 months. If it is gratitude for Thomas, for the hymn, for the altar cloths, for the house being a house again, I will. Well,